Today we are breaking down the real forces driving Australia's fastest growing property markets. Joining me here at the desk, Ryder from Hotspotting. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Aaron.
What is the biggest point, I guess, the biggest force underpinning growth in the property market right now?
Well, it's one that never gets talked about in media. Media's full of theories and really strong opinions about what's driving, property prices ever upwards and causing affordability to worsen periodically. Some people believe it's the government assistance for first home buyers, and some say it's the tax breaks for investors, and some are blaming high levels of overseas migrants coming into the country, and various other theories. But I think that the biggest reason why we have so many strong markets around Australia right now is the one that's never talked about, and that is the fact that we have this unprecedented level of infrastructure investment happening around the country. Almost $1,000 billion worth of projects underway or in planning. And we know from our research and our experience in the market that this is a really powerful driver of activity in property markets, and the reason why prices are rising in so many places right now.
What are the sorts of infrastructure projects that lead to the highest bounce in property prices? Is there a particular one?
Yeah, well, my personal favourite is hospitals, big medical facilities. And we did some numbers only yesterday, and we found that right now in Australia there are 144 significant hospital developments happening in Australia. Unprecedented level. Total is about $115 billion worth of investment. And we see that type of infrastructure investment having a big impact on property markets. Firstly, because if you're building $1 billion hospital facility, there'll be, say, 3,000 or 4,000 jobs in building it. But an even bigger impact when it's finished, because there'll be 5,000 or 6,000 jobs in actually operating it. And of course, people like to live close to where they're working. So any market that's got a $1 billion hospital being built in its midst is going to have a big impact on the local property market when it's being built, but particularly when it's finished. And we've seen that Sunshine Coast is a great example.
I was just about to say, the Caboolture University Hospital there, when that went in, the whole property market went up, didn't it?
It absolutely did. And because many of the people working in these facilities are well-paid, highly paid medical specialists, the top end of the Sunshine Coast market in particular, because there's 5,000, 6,000 people working there every day. They came from different parts of Australia, different parts of the world to live on the Sunshine Coast and working in that huge facility, and that really pumped up the top end of the Sunshine Coast market in particular. And we saw suburbs like Sunshine Beach doubling in value in 3 years, which is...
Well, it becomes the dream for these workers, doesn't it? Because you look at, say, a hospital on the Gold Coast, it never struggles to get staff. Everyone around the world would love to work at a hospital on the Gold Coast if you're in that profession. Yeah. And what that's doing is, I guess, spreading the dream to other parts of Australia.
Yeah. It's a really important part of the Gold Coast economy. Traditionally, it's been an economy that's a little bit fragile and volatile because of the reliance on international tourism, but it's broadened and strengthened, and one of the reasons why it is a stronger and broader economy and less susceptible to downturn is because it's got this huge education economy and a huge medical economy as well. A number of major hospitals, and it's an expanding thing, like the Southport Knowledge and Health Precinct is a work in progress, getting ever bigger, and that's really adding strength and depth the Gold Coast economy, so we don't have those fluctuations in the Gold Coast property market that we used to see.
It's interesting as well in the Melbourne experience, where this week the Metro Tunnel has opened, and that is going all the way out to Sunbury and opening up the northwest. And then you have the Westgate Tunnel project due to open by the end of the year. So many of the CEOs I've interviewed over the years, where the question is, why don't you build more in the west? And they say, because there's only one road, and if that goes down, it's over. What do these sorts of infrastructure projects do for property prices in these markets?
Well, they really do have a big impact, because firstly, the construction of them generates enormous economic activity and jobs. But when they're finished, they improve accessibility, obviously, for the locations that are connected by this new facility. So their impact is really substantial. So locations that maybe were less attractive because of the difficulty of getting to and from those places, suddenly access improves and they become more desirable. It's easier to get to them and get from them to the other parts of the city that people want to go to. So suddenly real estate starts selling more frequently and for higher prices in those locations. So right now, as we see it, the Melbourne market, which has been fairly dormant, one of the poorer performers in the Australian property market for the last, say, 3 years, is starting to come alive. And one of the big reasons for that, there's more than one reason, but one of the big reasons is these big infrastructure projects are really happening, really big ones. I mean, we're talking about, the
city-changing projects.
Yeah, absolutely. We're talking about projects measured in the tens of billions of dollars, and their impact is considerable. And lots of people are working on them, and the impact after they're finished is considerable.
What happens once they're finished? Because obviously we talk about hospitals where it brings on 5,000-6,000 jobs to the hospital after it's built. When there's massive infrastructure projects like roads and train tunnels, once it's done, obviously those workers sometimes disperse and go elsewhere. Is it a bit different?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the type of infrastructure. The ones that have lasting impact, because there's lots of jobs in operating them, even more than in building them, is like university campuses and medical facilities. Motorways tend to have lots of jobs in building them. Once they're finished, there's not so many jobs in operating them. So, yeah, that workforce will disperse. But in a city like Melbourne, there's so many big projects happening that they're more likely to stay and be working on those projects. But
it goes to your point as well that you made in the beginning. We often blame immigration for the reason that property prices are high, yet Melbourne's been stagnant for 3 years despite a huge number of new arrivals.
Yeah, that's right. Not helped by having the worst state government in the country, in my view, with their high property taxes and their legislation, which is actually quite onerous and hostile towards landlords, real estate
Anywhere but Melbourne has been what a lot of property developers have been saying.
Yeah, but having said that, because Melbourne hasn't risen for the past, say, 2 or 3 years, whereas cities like Brisbane, Adelaide and Perth have risen a lot, suddenly Melbourne looks like really good value for money. Its pricing level is below Brisbane's now, well below Sydney's, and it's on a par with Adelaide and Perth, and realistically, Melbourne should be more expensive than those cities. So people are looking at it and saying, this looks like a really good value for money, big population growth, big infrastructure spend generating all this economic activity. It's starting to look like a good buy, and people are willing to overlook the high property taxes because the opportunity to buy at the right time as Melbourne begins an upcycle is there. And
the Melbourne fundamentals are pretty strong as well, aren't they? It's a city that's always going to be pretty strong.
Depending on how you measure the boundaries, it's now Australia's biggest city.
That's just because we include Geelong, but Sydney doesn't include Newcastle. Speaking of New South Wales, we haven't really spoken much about that. The Western Sydney Airport's due to open over the next year. What impact will that have to Western Sydney, which has already been one of the huge growth areas of the country?
Yeah, look, I think a project like that, the enormity of it, and it's not just the airport, it's all the stuff that's built, the Aerotropolis. There's a medical precinct, the university campus, there's so much. There's going to be tens of thousands of jobs in operating that once it's all done. I like to think it's like feeding steroids to property markets. So the local government areas that surround it, like Blacktown, Liverpool and Penrith, are going to receive huge demand for people wanting to live close to that facility. As I said, tens of thousands of people are going to be working there and going there for various reasons.
The first airport that people have actually wanted to live near. Let's talk about, I guess, the volumes. Listing volumes keep dropping. What's behind that trend?
Well, we've got a shortage of everything in real estate. That's one of the reasons why prices keep rising. At a time when demand is strong, we just don't have the supply. We're still not building enough new homes. We're falling further and further behind the targets. Vacancy rates have been hovering around 1% nationally since COVID. So 4 or 5 years of no moving of the dial in terms of...
Yet I can't tell you how many announcements I've covered from different governments, state and federal, about what they're doing to fix it.
Yeah, well, usually when a state or federal government makes a decision that impacts on this, they make it worse, not better. All the energy in state government level is going into clampdowns on landlords, clamp down on real estate agent behaviour like underquoting, clamp down on builders, changing the legislation that impacts on the relationship between landlords and tenants, always in favour of tenants. All those things, I think the energy is going in the wrong places. It's not actually fixing the things that matter, which is shortage and high rentals and high prices. But to speak to your original question, listing levels, because of all those factors, are just coming down and down because there's high demand in all the major markets around the country, but the new supply isn't coming in. So we're starting to see every capital city in month-to-month terms and in annual terms is down considerably in terms of the number of listings of properties for sale.
There we go. We'll watch what happens next year. Terry Ryder, appreciate your time. Thank you.
You're welcome.